Thank you all for joining me up here. I know you've all prepared 2 minutes to begin with to talk about. Now we heard about the challenge, we heard about the opportunities for actions, and we have evidence of what needs to be done. The overall title is Transforming Global Food Systems Under Climate Change. Yet, we're not there yet. We are falling short at this stage, I'd like to say, or we still have a lot to do, you could also say. So Ida, you're a member of the Global Future Council. Can you tell us a bit about your vision for the future of food?
Yes, I can. I think I want to talk about two trends. One is the one that's happening amongst the more educated, the elites, those who buy the high-end products, and that trend that is happening in the other end of the market spectrum, because I think they're both important. I don't know how many of you remember that Naomi Klein wrote a book called No Logo. Do you remember that book? Okay. You know what happened after that book? What happened was that No Logo became a logo. Okay? So she was actually trying to tell people not to be so capitalistic and brand their things, and that whole idea became a new brand, to have no logo. And why am I telling this story is actually that the desire from that part of society, from the top groups of society, is actually driving market capitalism. No matter how it looks, in any form, that's driving people's desire of what a good life is. So I do want to praise the front runners in this debate that have actually made us all understand what changing diets means. Because we can talk about food waste. I know there are people here that know much more about that than I do. But I think there is one plug-and-play app before any other app out there, which is changing your diet. And it took me a long time to understand how strong that change is. Because I've been so working with climate, focused on energy for 20 years. I was so focused on clean energy that I missed that half of the problem is related to resources and land use. So I think that's slowly coming to all of our minds. And I think the change that is happening now, where we start to realize what's going on and people start to change their diets, is really going to drive desire around the world. And what I love is like countries like India could maybe teach us something about how to live really good lives. Because if you change your diet to a more plant-based diet, it's not all these things that it used to be with energy, that you can't drive a car, you can't go anywhere with a plane, you can't use that type of energy. It's actually a positive story from the beginning. You will become healthier, you'll become, I think, even happier. I think you'll have a much better, a longer life. You will actually have new ways of cooking. I think there are like 5-7 types of meat, but there are like thousands of ways of cooking vegetables. And I think that whole move, that really gives people something to do, that it's real, that is in front of them, and where you can plug yourself in. Whereas climate change is something up here, I'm down here, and my actions are so small, and then they seem, doesn't matter what I do. But once you plug yourself into this dietary shift, and you can see that that is one of the biggest ways you can impact the climate, it really makes sense. You become part of the solution, you become part of almost like a global movement. So I really want to praise the front runners creating this no logo movement that is in a way becoming, telling people what is a good life. That a good life is not necessarily to eat a lot of meat, to have a car, to buy a lot of things. It's actually something else. So that's the top. But I also want to warn those who think that this is just something for the creative class in the cities and people like myself. Because don't fall asleep. And that's what I tell the Danish agricultural sector. Don't fall asleep, guys, because we might be driving a market right now, which is very small. But the other days, a producer of a plant-based milk, I'm not allowed to call it milk, I'll do it anyway, oat milk, he told me, in a couple of years, I imagine I can be on the shelves in the supermarket for 50 cents per liter. 50 cents, guys. And just to let every producer of dairy products and meat know that the consumers are not sentimental. Like they will just switch whenever. So I think that this is going to hit really hard for those who stay in the animal-based markets. So I think there's a very strong push now. Somebody's pushing the market. It's not like the agricultural sector would normally say, we are producing whatever the market's demanding. This is more than 2 minutes, I'm sorry. But what is happening right now is somebody's driving the market. And if you just invest your money in the wrong, very, very heavy infrastructure, you might get a technological lock-in and lose a lot of money. So I think those two movements is something that is really making me a little bit optimistic, because all of the land we get freed out if we don't go down the road of animal-based food is amazing. We can build all the forest that we need to build, and we can start solving climate change. So that's making me hopeful.
Thank you very much. And Maurice, I think you have a large responsibility in your shoulders, because your company, Hansen, was actually appointed the most sustainable company worldwide last year in 2019. Now, what does it mean in terms of transforming the food system to become the world's most sustainable country?
You know, when we were first awarded the world's most sustainable company last year, and then second place this year, I think we took that with a lot of humbleness, but also a big responsibility. I would say it's credit to our more than 3,000 engaged employees that really want to make a change and contribute to a better planet. But it's also been a journey with our global customers that have really engaged with us in leveraging what Hansen has, which is unique, which is a platform of microbial and fermentation capabilities to take some of the world's largest challenges and convert them into opportunities. And I think it comes with a big responsibility for companies like Hansen that have that platform to really show that you can contribute and put the words into actions. And we're focused on a few important things for us to try to make a difference. Food waste being one of them, reducing antibiotic resistance, another one, and sustainable farm practices. And in all of those areas, what we are, which is the largest world producer of bacteria, we can use bacteria to replace some other less sustainable practices. And it's the moment of truth. I think it's a moment where we really need to show that as an industry, from farm to fork, we can make a difference by using natural and sustainable solutions and make a difference for a better world.
Thank you. And Katherine, we learned before that business as usual is now no longer an option. What does this mean as a university, as a research institution? Business unusual. Where do we have to go?
Well, first of all, please let me, Katrine, start by, apologizing, because I am a scientist. And this meeting is all about transformation. And yet I wasn't here all day, but I did look at what's been said. I haven't seen anybody really focus on what is transformation. And transformation is planned change. It's not about saying, how do we just sort of tweak the buttons that we know today so it'll still look almost the same, and yet we'll do something better. It's about saying, where do we need to be in the future, and what does that demand, and how do we work backwards from that? And I haven't really seen that happening. And when it comes to food, the food system, both production and use of food, it means lots of things. It means maybe that we don't have meat, but if we have meat, it's not going to be produced in the way that it's produced today. Well, how's it going to be? We have to talk about planning this change. And then we can go to the universities, because the universities are critical in helping society develop. And at the moment, we're not in a position to be able to contribute as much to this planned change as we ought to be. And that's because in order to make a planned change, you have to understand interactions within the system. And right now, we have an institute for geology there, and one for economics there, and one for climate change over there, and so on. And we operate in finding all the details in that box. It's as if we believed that if we could take all the details in all the boxes and put them in a big pot and stir them up, then we would understand how the earth works. And that's just not gonna work. It's just like asking the doctors that you know, one's a specialist in brain and one in heart and one in foot and one in stomach, and saying, okay, put all your knowledge in one pot and then we'll understand what a person is. So we need very much more to focus on the interactions between our disciplines. How do we make change? How do we make these interactions work? And we're not very good at that yet. We really need to work on that. And one of our problems is the fact that so much of our research, is paid for by companies. Your Christian Hansen, I think, is probably an exception because they're trying to imitate nature, and nature does work on interactions. You may look at interactions, but most companies are not looking at interactions, and most government research is financed to be able to try and support companies in there. So we don't have, first of all, we don't have research all the way around the world. In developing countries, it's different buttons, it's different interactions that are important. We have no data or evidence on those. And even in our countries where we do a lot of research, we don't understand the interactions. So we need to change the way we do research and certainly the way we do teaching.
It's a challenge for this house, this university.
Oh, no.
I think we've discussed this for decades in the university. Well, we need to figure out how to do it. Dhanush, you are part of the organization of today. You have heard about transforming food systems under climate change. We discussed in the morning the different proposals coming out of the report. So where does that take us? How does this help to catalyze transformation, do you think?
Yeah. So maybe if I take a step back, and I found Ida's remarks quite interesting. You talked about no logos, so I want to actually talk about a logo.
Okay.
If you don't mind. So if you look at the screen, so you see the logos of the 3 hosting institutions, mine being one of them, but on top you see a nice logo. So what is this logo about? So this is this global initiative for transforming food systems under climate change, which we've been facilitating. We don't own it. It's something we've facilitated for the last 2 years. And what the purpose was to bring over 100 different organizations together to address some of these questions about transforming food systems. What does it mean for different types of farmers? What does it mean for diets? What does it mean for food loss and waste? And arrive at consensus on what we need to do. And there are many reports, and they're all very important, and which tell us the importance of doing things, what we need to do. But we want to be a bit different. And in that, we want to actually facilitate those interactions that you referred to, facilitate action. So today, we've launched 3 actions which are proposed in the final report around food loss and waste, around diets, and social change. But we don't want to just propose these things are important. We know they are important. We've had several organizations and individuals. Sophie's leading social change. Selena is leading social change. Companies like Christian Hansen or Bayer, they are driving change. But what's missing? And I think, Andrew, you mentioned this in your presentation this morning. We assume that there are arrows between these efforts, and we assume that they are those interactions, but they don't actually exist. Maybe they do when people are really driving those interactions. But what we want to do under the umbrella of this logo is that we come up with these recommendations on the how. We bring together champions who are doing good things in their different spheres, and then we facilitate those interactions, those dialogues, to match finance with action, to match consumer demand with production. So those kind of interactions. So I would say under this logo, that's what's missing, the interactions, and that's what we want to facilitate.
Thank you very much. And I think that also points at something that Selena said before. You can't be the police. You have to make people, that's always the trick, I think. You have to make people think they came up with the solution. Then they like it. Then they're going to take it on. So I think, Ida, that's for you as a politician, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say something to what Katherine said, because I think it's right, but something comes even before that planning, which is the will to plan. Because engineers plan, politicians know that in order to be allowed to plan, to have the legitimacy to get everybody on board, you have to create the understanding of the problem and the desire to go somewhere. So I think we sit different places in the system, and I often see our role as trying to, and we've been too slow with that. I mean, we've just have not done the job well enough by leading, but leading in 2 ways. One is putting up the visions, getting people to want to buy into it, because it makes it so much easier to organize and to plan when you have people on board. And I think the political level can do a much better job in facilitating. Not only, we should change some framework. We can change taxes, we can change subsidies, we can do standards, but in the end, the best thing we can do is to get everybody on board on a move that we are going to do, and that everybody start playing their role as part of the solution. So I think that's, in a way, even before transformation, is the understanding of the problem. And I think that's what these social movements have done so well the last years, is really to get everybody to understand this is going to change, guys. And we've talked about yellow jerseys in France. I would say green jerseys might be just as big unstabilizing factor if you are afraid of social unrest. I mean, we will see that happening more and more if we don't if we don't tackle this problem. I'm much more afraid of that social civil disobedience. So I use that as those who do not buy into the vision and wanting to change climate change, I like to put that thread up. If you don't feel like you need to move now, I'll tell you that 14% of this population is ready for civil disobedience in the name of the climate. So there has to be, what are the drivers? And we all get motivated by different things. Some of them are carrots, some of them are sticks. So that's why I started where I do, and I think we can play a much better role of getting the players around the table to talk to each other and plan, but there needs to be a hammer up here. It's like, if you don't do this, we can talk forever.
Katherine, you have a comment?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I agree with what Ida said, but if we want to bring it back to the university, since my professor title is supposed to make me focus on that, I would say that one of our major problems at a university to make this people want to contribute to research which can help here is the fact that, I can't do anything political. And the real message here is that the Sustainable Development Goals are already decided by politics. They're not political anymore. It's a vision of where we want to go. And then it becomes the university's responsibility to deliver on how you do it. And you say, but we have freedom of research, and we have used the last 30 years trying to get researchers to do research which is relevant for companies, and they can get money out of companies, and it can have to do with innovation, and it can have to, if we use just a little bit of that same energy to try and get our researchers to focus on some of these challenges, and you can help. I mean, you can make it that when research monies are available, it is with that kind of a goal in mind. But we have a hard time moving here too.
And do we understand how to get things to move?
We need some more research on that, I think.
Mauricio, now Ida talked about sticks and carrots. What do you think for the industry to move forward on these topics? What are the sticks and the carrots, or what will make things happen?
Well, I think connected to what was just being discussed, I think talent is fundamental for the change. And I think we're talking today about young people and the drive that the new generation and millennials bring to that aspect. And I think it's also something where we need a system of a company like Hansen need the future leaders of change that can think systemically about how we develop sustainable solutions going forward. Obviously, having a very strong purpose in a company helps you attract the right talent, and we have seen, for example, after we were ranked the world's most sustainable company, our following in social media increased substantially, the number of applications that we receive and the caliber of the applications that we receive increased substantially. So I think for companies having a purpose that really gives talent a reason to join is important. But we need universities to produce change leaders. We need the researchers of the future to be interested to really work on how we develop the solutions for the future.
So I have a question for all of you, I think, because we just had an election last year in Denmark where we saw many young people actually asking for change. And Katherine, I think at universities we also have many students asking for change and to see things happening. And you just talked about the talent that you want to attract. So do you think the role of the youth at the moment is to push us elderly people, or do they have a different role?
The fact that you're calling yourself an elderly person is just getting me to fall off the chair. But when that is said, Katrine, I think it's very unfair of us elderly people to sit here and say, you guys need to do it, you need to push. But we need to use the inertia or the momentum that's coming from that push to push ourselves. This isn't just their job. We mucked it up, so we can still contribute.
Okay.
I always like to also, tell a little bit of a personal story. I was attracted to join Christian Hansen because of its purpose. So I think it's not only connected to millennial or young people. I think we all need to think about, change agents. But there's something beautiful about the new generation, because I think they are less bound by the boundaries that we have set ourselves. So I think they can help in the vision of a more sustainable planet.
Mm-hmm. And I think the sheer number of people moving together right now is the important thing. Because, if all of us have been in this field for 20 years, and we've all been pushing like, God, Katherine Richardson, who's pushed more than you? You can sleep well at night, So I think that it's a generation that understands themselves and see themselves as part of this movement. And if we could widen that to more generations to see that we want to be part of that movement too. I see how young people are educating their parents over dinner, so that the farmers I used to discuss with that were telling me I was this green crazy person, they're like coming back and say, oh, maybe you had some points in what you said 10 years ago. Or, political colleagues who would normally say climate is something, nice to have, not need to have changed because of their young people. But the young people also know about this because we had it in schools, so it is a whole system that is moving right now. And what I think we really need is positive visions to tell us what we can do. And I really want to urge again, I think we should tell the 21st century is the century of the plant-based world. It's not you can't eat meat, but let's say does somebody have a Latin word? There must be a researcher in here.
We'll find one.
We have Anthropocene, which is a very depressing term. Couldn't we invent that? Like the 21st century is the century where just looking at our diets, we don't have to become vegan or vegetarians, but just looking at our diets, we plug into maybe the biggest change we can make on this planet. Mm-hmm. And that, I know, moves the systems. When the consumers move, they actually do move the whole food system, because you do look at your customers in the end. So I think that we should all plug ourselves into that, because there are a lot. There are many. So let's plug us into them, not because we were late, we were early, but we can plug us into them because there are many.
Thank you. Dhanush, CCAFS is a $50 million research program for development in the global south. I just wondered, we talked about the young people. Is this a developed world thing? Or what is happening in the global south, and what are the sticks and the carrots, do you think, when we look beyond Europe and the US and Australia and so on?
Yeah. So actually, just also trying to answer the previous question that you had on this, because I was just reflecting on these perspectives, and my job is policy engagement manager. Yeah. So what that involves, one of the things is sort of engaging in climate negotiations and trying to inform these negotiations based on science. And no offense to any negotiators, but for a young idealistic person, it can be very hard. Because the pace of change is very, very slow. And it's diplomacy, agreed, but it's not the change you would like to see. So I often get a bit depressed looking at all this and the pace of change. But last year was really inspiring for me. And it was suddenly, the power that young people had. We were at the climate negotiations in Madrid. There were 500,000 people on the streets. And, the power that young people had and the pressure that it put on the policymakers, that was really inspiring for me, because what motivates me is to see climate action at scale. And I think that's where the power that we can see. And so now the second part of the question is like CCAFS, it's a 50 million per year research program. What can we do? What are we doing as well? So that's actually what we're trying to address in one of the actions which was released today. So if you're interested, there is a sample copy outside. You can download it from our website. There is a link there. So it's trying to think, there is this huge potential of social change in young people, but how can we link science to that? How can we provide them with the science which can empower young people in the north and in the south? And that's sort of the issue that we're tackling with that action. And we believe that's really what can, catalyze the transformation and better linkages between science and young people. And that could be through capacity building, but there could be other modalities as well.
Yep. Thank you. I think it's time for questions from the audience to the panelists. Yes, Sophie, you already have one ready. We need a microphone for you. Coming up.
Not that you've heard me speak enough. But my question is for Professor Richardson. Is that your name? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll buy that one.
I heard Bruce Campbell actually speak a while back, and he used a phrase that really interested me, and it was that a lot of technology and science has been shelved. And you were talking a lot about research and how research is ongoing and there needs to be more. But how can we ensure that that research isn't shelved and it's actually being used? Because I'm in university, I work with researchers, I'll probably be one, who knows? But how can we ensure that the research isn't shelved and just seen as interesting?
Well, actually, I think that the responsibility for that lies to a very large degree with the researchers themselves, because normally in research applications or even in research papers, you write at the bottom, and this could be, or this will be relevant for X, Y, and Z. And then you never go any further. I actually think we should start at the other end, and when you propose to do your research, you should have to say, how does this research contribute to transformation of the economic and finance system, or the food system, or the energy system, or whatever it is, and follow up on it there. So I think a good deal of responsibility lies there. But I think we have another problem as well, and that is technology, and that people think technology is going to be the solution here. Technology will not be the solution, because our ultimate challenge is the fact that our resources are limited and we have to share them among 9 to 10 billion people in 2050. And technology can't make biodiversity, it can't make energy, it can't make phosphorus. But what technology can do is it can help us use our resources more efficiently. The problem is we've never used technology for that before. We've always, I can't think of any single case where a technological development has caused us to use less resources in the end. It's made resources more available to people. So we have to we have to change the purpose of some of the research that we're doing. I don't think we should do technological research unless we can show that it in some way is helping us to get more value out of less resources.
We had another question.
Societal value, not money. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Mogens Buch-Hansen. I have been a researcher throughout my professional career, so I fully agree the need for research. But I also think that the politicians have a challenge, because the research, and there's a huge amount of research that can help to improve the world, can help to make us sustainable in the long run. But we need the politicians to implement things. So it's very much up to you and your colleagues, Ida, to ensure that all the research that is already there, and to support more, but without help from the politicians, the research may just be forgotten. So we need you.
It's a comment. Mauricio, I was about to ask you before. Now we talked about research and how research is going to contribute. I know you have scientific collaboration as a company, but can you add something to that? How, in a broader perspective, also from the company's side, you see how we often get stuck at a point where we do research. It's nice. We learn a lot of things. We also sometimes think, as Katherine says, this can actually contribute to X, Y, Z. But why? Why doesn't it? Or what can we do? Or could you see things, perspectives that aren't exploited today?
Yeah, I think we go back to the concept of collaboration and how important it is. So if I would say the journey or the transformation that I've seen is, we used to think that, the lab at Christian Hansen was our world, and now we're shifting towards the world is our lab, right? And really use the tremendous gift of bacteria that sits around the world and how we can use that to develop the contributions to the new food system. But that requires a much more holistic collaborations with research organizations, with universities, with institutions, with government, with policy setters. For an example that I can give is, we have bacteria that can replace the use of very dangerous pesticides in a way that is economically equivalent for farmers. Now, obviously, making that change without policy takes years. But if you do it with policy, it moves very fast. So interestingly enough, in some developing markets like Brazil, we have seen a strong determination to move that very fast, versus in some European markets, it moves tremendously slow. So I think we get back to research has to have the right framework with policy, with research, with institution to advance our drive for a more sustainable planet.
You have a short comment, then we take another question.
Just to say that there's not a lot of research that is just plug and play for us. It's not like we can take some, even looking at how we can take land out of use for agricultural land and, put it so it's not being farmed. This university would say this gives you 18 tons per hectare. And we bring it into the ministries and they're like, we will calculate maybe 10 or 11 if we're to be realistic and not have a scandal later on. So every time things move from there to implementation, there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of things and the whole economic calculation, how do we do that? So I think even though we try to do that, there's not a lot that's plug and play. We have all the programs where we try to do the incubator programs like GUDP, MUDP, EUDP on environment, food, and energy, where we try to help companies. So I think what we could do more in a small country like this is to say we've set this 70% goal on climate change. How can we invite more companies, more research institutions to deliver to that goal? Because we don't always agree about the end goal, but this time we actually do. So we could much easier set up a system where we could say, okay, you have a solution, we'll try it out here, maybe China will like it, and scale it even more up. So we have this whole idea of turning Denmark into this green startup nation or innovation nation that can sort of show as a lab that this can be done. So that's a lot of thinking going on like this to turn us into that place.
I saw you, but I'll just take the audience first. One question here.
Hi, my name is June, and I graduated in a master in integrated food studies last year. And the thing about what is going on in the universities with the lack of independent research makes also the question the more necessary: who puts up the benefits of the technology?
Any answers?
Well, I think we have a problem here because our universities come back to us and say, is your research being used? But the point is that research is, I wouldn't want anybody to use my research directly. It needs to go into a pot and be compared to so that a consensus comes out in the other end. So that's one of the problems in terms of going directly from one research project to we're developing these brokerage institutions in the IPCC, the IPBES, there's now something for the Sustainable Development Goals, and ISIS for fish and so on. So we're developing these brokerage regions. So it does take time to go from research to decision. So that's one of the problems, but I think we have another problem in the way we have the structure around different sectors. For example, I honestly do believe the research is there right now to make planes fly on green energy, on green fuels. It's there. Why isn't it happening? Well, no country's responsible for the, I mean, you know, we've got IATA and they're kind of on their own thing over here, and it will be more expensive and nobody wants to push for it because of and it might also mean that we have to prioritize how we're going to use our biomass, and oh, that might be bad for our farmers if we have to do that. So I mean, the technical solution is there, but for various reasons, it isn't happening. And everybody's going saying, you can't fly. Oh, you're a bad person. But in fact, we're not going to give up flying. We're still going to travel in 2050, and we're going to fly. So let's get that technology out there. It's there.
So it's on the politicians too.
Just a depressing fact for you guys, which is that human beings don't seem to be really motivated by knowledge.
Dhanush, do you have a comment?
It's not like, oh, there's new research, let's do that, man. You know, it's just where we have to go back to what you're also saying, like it's not a technical solution, it's a political problem we have here. How do we get people motivated to actually change things? And that's why I come back to the food thing, because it's really answer to so many questions, so many people out there. How can I be part of the solution? How can I change something? And those who love to fly, you know, then they can eat less meat or whatever they want to do, you know. To whatever motivates people to change their behavior, I don't care if it's as long as they do it, you know, fine with me. And I think it's really important to understand what gets people to change, because once the willingness is there, you know, we can have pretty bold goals and we can start organizing this transformation.
Dhanush, you had a comment to that?
Yeah, maybe just to comment, there were several questions and comments about doing research better, and that's the topic of my PhD, so I feel like I should comment. I cannot do that from a university perspective, but from a CCAFS international network perspective, what we've done is to look at, you know, how can we do our research better. We looked into the literature on this topic. We also looked into a number of case studies of where we've been successful at getting research into use and where we've failed as well, because there's lessons being generated from both. And based on all this, what we found is that, you know, we call it the 3/3 principle in doing research differently. So it's basically how the principles are on investing money in research. So we actually only call for 1/3 of money actually being invested in research. So the other 1/3 is actually spent on engaging with your users and engaging with them, target users. It could be the politicians, it could be the businesses, whoever you want to target to achieve an outcome. You engage them at the beginning of the research, so you have the right research questions. You engage them through the process, so they're engaged and involved, and you engage them after you've developed your product so that they're actually using it and you can support that. And the other 1/3 is actually around communications and getting it to scale. So we could be working in partnership with WBCSD, for example, but how can we learn from that and also benefit other countries beyond companies beyond WBCSD? So that was our lesson, really, and doesn't mean that we don't have core research projects. These principles, when you look across a portfolio, you need to emphasize across these 3 different elements, and that's what we found worked in the CCAFS context. So that could be something for universities also.
Mm-hmm. Good. Selina, you had a comment or question?
Now, we talked a lot about the research, but we need to talk about the money. Show me the money. I mean, you know, 2 days in the Vatican. We were there in November. We were discussing about how to stop wasting food waste and food loss. You know, we found the solutions for everything. And then there was a question, who's going to pay for all that? You know, we have research, we have knowledge, we have everything, but the fact is, there's no money. Which I just said it to New York Times. I mean, if the fight against, let's say, food waste would not die out in the long run, we need some money. I mean, my organization, you know that, Ida, because you're a good friend, we've been there for many years. My organization, Stop Wasting Food, worked 8 years without money. I mean, can you ask people to do that? No. We need some money. So what I suggested in New York Times and also in Altinget, you know that, Ida, we have to establish a fund. Maybe a government have to take that, to establish a fund for the food system, climate change help fund, the Stop Wasting Food Fund, you name it, because initiatives, lots of research, but there needs some money to do that. Otherwise, everything will die out in the long run.
Thank you. And actually, I'm not going to let you answer that right now, because we still have another task for you to take out your app, and I would ask you to stay up here, because then you get to wrap up after we have the results, just a short wrap up from each of you in the end. So you should take out your Hoover app again, and then now we may create word clouds. This is one of the products, one of the outcome of the conference, that we create the word clouds. And the first question is in 1 or 2 words: what is the biggest challenge needed to overcome in order to reduce GHG emissions from food systems? Can be money, can be other things that we discussed today, but I just ask you to type 1 or 2 words. What are the biggest challenges? Or the biggest challenge? Do we see the cloud coming up? Nitrogen, it's one. Yeah. Now it's challenges. I should tell you we come back afterwards to opportunities. So stick with the challenges. And the panel can use whatever comes up in their wrapping up together with what we've discussed so far. Whoop. We need the cloud come. Yeah. Can we still see the cloud? Okay, capitalism is big.
Consumption, political.
Yeah. So maybe we went to 84 before we're almost at 70. So what we have is political will, capitalism, consumption, awareness, nitrogen, meat, and the other ones are too small to read, so that makes it easier. I think these are our take-home messages for the big challenges. And then we move on to the opportunities, or what is the biggest opportunity that we have for reducing GHG emissions from the food systems? Research, remember research. Do we see the cloud? And I shouldn't misguide you actually by proposing answers. So somebody is typing already biggest opportunities for reducing. Money comes up, yep. All right, we're above 70 again. Biggest one is partnerships. That fits very well on the SDGs, I'd say. Awareness, diet shift, technology, plant protein, collaboration, synergies, diet. CRISPR also comes up as one of joy. Thank you very much. I think we're almost at 80, about the same numbers that we had before. So biggest challenges, but also I would say a lot of opportunities and hope, because this is not just one thing, this is actually a variety of opportunities that are being pointed at. And now I'd like to give each of you 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up and tell us what you learned from this panel discussion, and maybe also from the answers that we had from the audience. Who would like to?
I'll just make a
Mauricio?
comment from my
Yeah.
side. I think it was mentioned in the conversation that, the SDG goals provide a fantastic framework that's holistic. I think for us as a company, it made a big difference that we were able to quantify that 82% of our revenue contributes towards that. And I think we see that that resonated a lot in our outreach and engagement with society.
Yes, looking at the problems, which was like capitalism and consumption, I don't think we'll get rid of any of those two things the next 10 or 12 years. So we have to think about how we can work with what's there. So I would say instead of starting this whole discussion, pro and con growth and capitalism, let's see how you can make it your friend, And I think there's the UN platform called the IREP, the resource panel, is really working on a model for decoupling growth and energy and resource consumption. And that would, for me, be the clearest measurement of anything. Are you decoupling the amount of resources and water and land you're using in your production or in your consumption from the growth? Because I think we want joy, we want the future, we need to consume something, or at least eat something, So we have to talk about how that good life looks and how we can measure. We'll have a vision to get the political will there. We'll have to have a vision of where we're going, and then we have to have some data and some measurement on how we actually decouple our economies from the resource and energy consumption. And it doesn't have to be more difficult than that. So if you get really focused on that, and then we can maybe move into the 21st century being the century of the plant-based diet. You can have
Somebody
meat,
has to
but you don't
think
have to do it
quick.
every day. I think it's a strong vision for the 21st century.
The last session, actually, we ended on the note, I think you weren't here, but the note of producing enough with less, which is maybe not so bad.
But that's where the plants come in. Honestly, 27% of our planet, all of North America, all of South America, is used for animals. 7% is for the rest of the food system. I mean, you don't need any more data than that. You don't need any more research to see we can't eat as much meat as we do today, or we have to eat meat in different versions or different ways and much less of it. But there's so much out there to eat. It's gonna be fun, man. It's a lot of joy, and thank you all who's actually helping us create better food and spending all time on that instead of consuming all kinds of shit, Help us consume good food, it's much better.
So, you didn't hear before also what Jais Valeur was telling us, I think in one of the investigations, 91% people want to do something for the climate, but I think it was 91% still want to eat meat. So, pardon? Oh, it was a 91 that didn't want to pay more for food.
But I
Okay,
didn't
shouldn't
say
misquote
that, I
them.
didn't say they should become vegan or vegetarian. I just say, eat some more plants and you'll be happier and have a more fun life and be responsible.
Catherine, how can research help us in that?
Oh, I thought I was supposed to pick
No,
up one
you
of the
wrap up,
words
you
there.
wrap
You
up, that's-
told me. And I picked out a neat word that got so small you didn't mention it again. But I picked it because it is both represents in my mind both a barrier and an opportunity, and it's mindset change. And I did it because I was recently interviewed by one of these young, sexy men in nice clothes in one of those cars that's, so close to the ground that this grandmother was thinking, are they going to get a crane to get me out of it? So I wasn't concentrating 100% on the interview. But at one point he turned to me and he said, but and he had a smart cashmere sweater on. He was really, and he said, am I in 2050? Am I still going to have nice clothes? And am I still going to be able to drive around? And am I going to have a house with good furniture? And I said, oh yes. He kept asking. I kept saying yes, yes, yes. And he said, well, what's the big problem? What's different in 2050? I said, you won't throw anything away, because you will either could reuse it for something else, or so you won't throw anything away. You will use resources in the same way that you use your money, and nobody would use more money than absolutely necessary to buy a good or a service. So why do you use more resources? So he clearly had a picture in his head of all these things I was going to take away from him. No, I'm just going to make it very different.
Mm-hmm. And Dhanush, would you like to wrap up also?
Yeah, thanks everyone for those comments in the word cloud. I really enjoyed reading them. So just some quick reflections, just looking at them. So The first point, biggest challenge was capitalism, and I don't, as Ida said, see that changing, and it's relative to different countries and their systems. But the other point is also consumption. And these 2 points kind of go together. But what's interesting is the other side. In capitalism, in a consumption-oriented society, customer is king. That's the premise of marketing and business. Customer is king. So customer has a lot of power. And we've just seen, Selena, from your example, how in Denmark customers were able to get supermarkets to sell ugly food. So that's a good, the power of consumers in capitalistic society is quite high. And if we can bring that power together through social change movements, that's a great amount of power that people might have. And that also goes with this other challenge, which is around political will. And I think, as I mentioned early on, there's been more and more pressure on politicians as a result of the movements by young people and students and the school strikes and the Extinction Rebellion and all these movements. That's really putting pressure. And you mentioned, Katrine, also on the impact that young people are having in Danish elections. So that's again a sign that, political will, a challenge, but it could also be an opportunity if we turn it around. And if we look at the opportunity side, I saw many of the words, and I think it sort of aligns with what we've been thinking. It aligns with what's in those 3 briefs. But the biggest point that got attention, and I think that's crucial, is around partnerships. We know what we need to do. We know who's doing it and who's doing it well and who's not doing it also. But what we need to do is, again, as Andrew said, we need arrows connecting these people and facilitating actions through partnerships. And at times, it might be partnering with people you're not so used to. From a research organization perspective, university perspective, maybe partnering with government where political priorities fluctuate, or business where priorities may be different. It can often be challenging, having been in this position. But we need unconventional, business unusual partnerships which can help us to get what we all know and agree upon into action at scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to thank you all. Dhanush, you actually pointed at the words that I found really interesting, which is partnerships and collaborations, because through these last 2 sessions, we heard from the science, we heard from the youth movements, from Stop Wasting Food, we also heard from companies, from the political side, and I don't think this challenge is going to be handled by any one of us alone. It really has to be a diversity of solutions, as you also pointed out, and us working together in new ways. So that's the hopeful part for me, I think. So I'd like to thank you all being on this panel, and to the audience for contributing.